Hello, it's Grandmama. Time for another story from a Hometown Scrapbook by Ben Weatherwax. State goes dry. Hello there. We have turned the pages of the Hometown Scrapbook tonight to a New Year's Eve when Grays Harbor, along with the state of Washington, found itself making history. For Grays Harbor had come over the rough road of civilized decadency and its rowdy and unruly youth. It was the final step in the direction of moderacy. And probably no part of the state of Washington felt as abnormal in its new suit of clothes than the New Year's Eve morning, as did Grays Harbor, the traditionally roughneck community that had followed the dictates of the voting public and along with the rest of the state had gone dry. Yes, it was quite a day for Grays Harbor. In Hopeland and Aberdeen, men and boys patrolled the streets looking into windows and prowling old familiar spots in wonder to see the magic that had been wrought with a touch of a wand. Yes, it was quite a day, or shall we say, quite a night. And the last few hours of 1915 as Grays Harbor, the port that had once bragged it was the roughest than the Barbary Coast, turned over a new leaf. And when Hugh McIntosh has said a few words from our sponsor, we'll open the scrapbook to the historic occasion and read again the stories of Grays Harbor in the throngs of growing dry. But first, here's Hugh to take the customary few seconds for our sponsor. It was October 28th, 1918, when the law that Andrew J. Volstead thought up was passed by the House of Congress, and the foreboding shadow of prohibition moved across the nation. But it did not make a material change in the order of things on Grays Harbor, for Grays Harbor had already quieted the swinging doors nearly 3 years before, and the well-worn bar towels of Aberdeen's 35 saloons and Hoquiam's 17 groggles, of Cosmopolis 4 oases, and Montesano's 3 had long since been discarded. And the stamp of chalk boots at the bar rail, the clink of glasses, and the smoothly spoken "What's yours?" had echoed for what most people thought was the last time. You see, it was back in 1915 that the people of the state went to the polls and voted on the question of prohibition. And they voted, much to their own surprise, to dry up the state of Washington. Oh, it was not unique. It was happening in many states. Oregon did it the same year, and 16 other states took such an action in 1915. Rowdy Body, California didn't, however. But that's another story. The Washington state did, and Grays Harbor had its choice of going along with the state or seceding from the People's Commonwealth. It went along for two reasons. First, the people of the county were so torn with dissension on the matter that they couldn't even agree to disagree with the state. And secondly, Aberdeen had a mayor who believed the law was made to be enforced, and he was going to see that the state did what Aberdeen did, and vice versa. The mayor was Jim Phillips, who had just nosed out Eugene Francis in one of the hottest campaigns the harbor had ever seen. And what Aberdeen did, the county was bound to do. So, the date of January 1st, 1916 was looked forward to with considerable apprehension, for that was the date set by the state lawmakers when the premises would suddenly cease operation. Midnight, the mystic moment between the old year and the new, was the exact time of cleavage between the era of wetness and the era of dryness. In some parts of the state, no one could ever consider the change in restriction that would be affected, for there were parts of the state that had long exercised local options and had already forgotten the sound of swinging doors and the sight of bounding Bristow's. But Grays Harbor, as we have noted, was not such a place. In fact, it was about as wet a spot as the state boasted. It had close to 75 licensed saloons serving its population with a strong, uncut whiskey. Along with its brawling waterfront, the sailors coming and going had built a 30-year tradition of taking it straight, and loggers had roared and brawled in unrestrained recreation with the spiritus fermentus, and it was a basic element. When shipping men talked of the rough spots on the coast, they spoke of San Francisco's Barbary Coast, the dives in Acapulco, and the roar of Grays Harbor's barroom row. And the latter, they decided time and time again, was the roughest of them all. The grog was thicker, it flowed freer, and the air bubblier, and the fights rougher, the oath stronger on Grays Harbor than any other place on the coast. True, the harbor had gone through a change of ways along in 1911 and 1912. Billy Gould, the wharf rats were gone. Some of the roughest spots had been sandpapered down, but it was still a gay, wet way for the incoming seaman and the holiday-bound timber beast when the voters of the states exercised their prerogative in 1915. Now, in 1915, Elmer Hemrick was keeping the vats bubbling in the town's brewery at the foot of Lincoln Street. From 30 to 40 employees were busy keeping the barrels filled and delivering the bottling to the harbor's home product of the barley and hops. And as the day approached when the state was going to turn its new leaf, the brewery employees planned an observance. On the 4th of December 1915, they mixed their last batch of brew, lowered the brewery flag to half-mast, and put on black armbands. Manager Elmer made a public statement. "We were going to can clams," he said. "On Grays Harbor, we'll can clams. But we'll move most of our staff to California, where they'll go on making beer for that state." Brewmaster Ernest Block presided over the mixing of the last batch of the fermented stuff and observed that he had presided at mixing of the first batch in the brewery in 1912. Now, in 3 short years, he was mixing the plant's final batch. There were tears intermingled with the frothy malt as the ceremony came to a close. It was difficult for the harbor to adjust to thinking of the new step. For one thing, what would a man do when he wanted to wet his whistle? "Why," said WCTU, "you'll stop at the drinking fountain provided on the sidewalk in front of Wolf's store." Or, said one of the shopkeepers, "have a soft drink," or a dozen new products, including one questionable liquor labeled Bevo, appeared on the shelves of local stores. The brewers of the state advocated the continued manufacture of what was called near beer, but said that the state beer of any kind in alcoholic beverages, it can't even be near. The law said that any brevity with formal 1 or 2% of alcohol would be regarded as too near and hence illegal. Several of the town's huskiest saloons announced that they would convert to serving sandwiches and buttermilk. Christmas 1915 was the wettest one in the southwestern storm. It appeared that the harbor was trying to soak up its fill and share of the stimulants before they disappeared under the Volkstad cloak. Liquor shops and specials on their items to clear their stock against the ban of the sale. And as the day of doom approached, the saloon operators announced their intention. 11 Aberdeen saloons would stay in business as men's recreation parlors. 14 of them would quit business. 10 were undecided. In Hoquiam, most of them decided that they would try to stay open, pending a close-up look of what a dry community would look like. In Hoquiam, Mayor McGee sent patrolman Bill Beaver on the rounds of saloons to inform the operators of his restrictions on the sale of too near beer. The Grayport Big Tom's, Ed Betchtold's, the Blue Front, the U&I bar, the Royal, the Club, the Two Jacks, the Maple Leaf, heard the warnings like a stroke of doom. The Brook, the Bellings, the Olympus, and the Marquess bar took their warning in silence. Shaw's and Davis Place was visited by officers Beaver, the Yellowstone, the New York, the Californian Wine House, and the Hoquiam Liquor Company. Each said that they would comply. In Aberdeen, Chief of Police Bob Schmidt announced that in compliance with Major Phillips' orders, he was directing the saloons to be closed promptly at midnight. At the stroke of that hour, they were deceased in the sale of alcohol stimulants. A pall of gloom began to descend over Aberdeen's barroom row long before the closing time. "We'll be open for cards and billiards to sell cigars," announced some of the bar owners. The city promised to reduce their license fees, and the building owners promised to lower rents. The Pioneer, the Washington, the Mint, the Commercial, the Humboldt, Broadway Wine House, Kaufman Liquor Company, the Savory and Shell, and the Ladley Palace said they would try to stay in business. The Star, the North Pole, the Olympia, the Moonshine Bar, the Fashion, the Harbor, the Whale, the Club, the Alaska, the Brook would close. But definitely. A few like the Capitol, the Schlitz, the Royal My House, the California Wine House, and the Central said they'd make up their minds later. A few days before the new year, the partisans announced their plans for observance of the occasion. 3 Aberdeen churches and the Salvation Army announced a service to mark the new order, the burial of John Barleycorn. The Sailors Union on the Pacific announced a wake for the old boy and laid in an ample supply against the big party. Throughout the last day of 1915, Grays Harbor stocked up. The law permitted a person owning spirits to consume in the privacy of their home until the supply was exhausted, but he could buy no more, nor could he consume it in public. So the imbeciles laid in their supply. Some of the saloons delivered to good customers. Delivery equipment became in short supply. One firm hired 2 men with wheelbarrows to trundle the selected vintages of assorted beer to private sellers. In Hoquiam, the Reverend James A. Sutton and Reverend Harry Van Engel announced they would tour the saloons as a goodwill gesture. It is promptly labeled a ministerial tears, and the whole idea denounced. The ministers suddenly abandoned their scheme. Throughout the evening, glasses clinked at a rate that the harbor had never known before, and their hall on South F Street, the Sailors Union, wound up an era in heroic style. While the congregation at the Presbyterian, Methodist, and Baptist Church were burying John Barleycorn according to plan, the Reverends Gibson and Randolph spoke solemn rites over the occasion, and Captain Hunter of the Salvation Army provided a militant pomp for the occasion. And then, promptly at midnight, as the year of 1916 appeared on the dials of the harbor's clocks, the noisy, boisterous farewell to the good old days came to a rousing conclusion. Down the streets of the harbor city, saloon keepers locked their doors and went home. Some sat in solitary bewilderment at the final arrival of the long-anticipated chain. The Lion Bar, Aberdeen police rounded up 3 last of the town drunks. Prohibition had arrived. And now, Hugh, it's time for a few words from our sponsor. Yes, that was the way Prohibition came to Grays Harbor. In Hoquiam, 1 saloon remained open to serve buttermilk and sandwiches. In Montesano, the Oklahoma bar put up a sign, soft drinks, and waited to see what would happen. It was amazing. For 2 days, police had arrested 7 each day in Aberdeen on an average for drunkenness, saw nary a bewildered citizen staggering home. A new age had begun, and to be called Prohibition, and its birth of this era we find tonight in our Hometown Scrapbook. Thanks for listening.